Let's just close our eyes and we'll start this session with 15 minutes of silence. Just take your attention inside yourself to your breath and your body and just be with whatever is. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning. So for today's conversation, there's been a lot of little questions brewing, and I think some of them we've probably touched on earlier in the piece, but there's just some unfinished strings attached to them. So we'll see how this goes. I think for me, the one at the moment that's really pulling on me is my confusion around what and how we would define a soul and whether or not we even have one, based on all my study of Vedic knowledge, which very much believes in this and the soul and the reincarnation of a soul, Buddhism, which believes that there isn't necessarily an individual souls, but there are souls per se, but reincarnation is not so important. And then in Taoism, where that doesn't really exist whatsoever, it's just energy and all consciousness. So, because there are some experiences, as you and I know, where you're like, oh no, I definitely I've known this person on some sort of level. Like there's a deep, deep connection there that the rational mind can't even put words to, or there's a felt sense of knowingness sometimes that happens that I think I would attribute to that's our souls have met, or there's something on that plane happening. Can you shed some light from your perspective on what all that is?
I think we've touched on it before, and I think at that point I told this story from the Dalai Lama, which I'll repeat here, because I think for me it cuts to the heart of the matter. I wasn't present at this talk. This is just a reported talk that I heard, but the Dalai Lama was giving a talk and someone in the audience stood up and asked him, is there reincarnation? And he said, of course there is. And then he gave one of those classic Dalai Lama laughs, and he said, but there's nothing personal about it. And I think that sums up where I find myself with it, which is after the end of a human life, whatever psychic material is left over from that life, and what I mean by left over is whatever energy is there that hasn't been integrated and resolved through the living of that life, then forms part of the substance that goes on to infuse itself in various body-mind organisms in the future. And so even though that energy may have belonged in a particular life to a particular body-mind organism, as we know from our own sense of the absence of personal doership, that organism had a simple identification with it that was functional and needed for that particular separate person to negotiate their way through the manifestation. But there was no ownership of it. It was a simple identification with a separate body-mind and a destiny. So whatever is left over energetically from the living of that destiny will then go back into, as it were, the collective pot of energies that still have a need to be experiencing the manifestation again. But they did not ever belong to a separate person, and they will never fundamentally belong to another separate person. They will simply become the energetic material that infuses the next sequence of body-mind organisms. So I think it's impossible, if you have come to this understanding that a separate person is not true, it doesn't actually exist, then by extension a separate soul would also belong to that understanding that if you want to use that word soul, and my last teacher would always say when someone brought up the concept of soul, he said, I only know two souls. One is at the bottom of my foot and the other is something that I eat. But the point he was making was that actually, if you really see through the lack of separate personhood with its idea of separate free will, then it's much easier to come to the place where you start to move into this vision, into this seeing that all is one, and that there really are only apparent individuals on the surface of that particular play of consciousness. So the way I see it is whatever is left over is then recycled. But it's not necessarily recycled in the same particular packaging that it had within one particular body-mind organism when it was alive. So it may be that certain bits of that energy get reconfigured with other bits in this great impersonal pot that infuses the next life forms with what's needed to be actually lived out. So that's what the Dalai Lama meant, I think, from there's nothing personal about it. Yes, there is reincarnation of energies that have not completed their particular journey of resolution and integration, and therefore will need the vehicles of later body-mind organisms in order to be able to complete that energetic journey. But to associate them with a particular individual, by definition, within this understanding, cannot be true, because within this understanding, that individual doesn't really exist. It is an appearance in the manifestation of separation. But once the understanding has landed in that separate individual, then he or she experiences him or herself in a completely different way, as belonging to a whole, not being separate from a whole, and watching his or her life being lived through the body-mind organism that there still is a simple identification with, so that that body-mind organism can function and distinguish itself in its actions within the manifestation. Having said all that, there are many instances, and I've had them myself, where a particular memory or sense of déjà vu or particular vision or sense of past experience comes up so strongly in an individual that it's very hard, almost impossible, not to look at that as something that actually belongs to you, because it feels so personal when it's happening. So many times that can take place in people, experiences of what people call past lives. And again, there isn't any contradiction between that experience having validity as long as it isn't tainted by an idea of personal ownership, of a particular person going through these different lives in the manifestation. That cannot be true within this understanding, but past memories related to the particular unresolved material that infused a particular body-mind organism can come up and be made conscious within that. But even though they would feel very personal because they emerged from inside those leftover energies that infuse that body-mind organism, they're not in essence personal. It always comes back to there isn't anything personal in truth. It is one consciousness. and everything is playing out in an appearance on top of that one thing.
And so, in my work doing death walking, I hear of really real potent experiences that people have after someone that they love has died. And, you know, to track it with the intellect, you'd be like, yeah, for sure. They're leaving genuine signals and signs that there is still a presence of that person or their energy that are too nuanced, you know, to be able to call a mistake, or there's been like a pact or an agreement about a special word, and, you know, all these interesting things. So what's happening then in those realms when we're down here in human form, where someone has dropped their human body? I would say that they're then back into the, like, non-identified, back into the realm of consciousness, but then somehow communicating down. Do you have any insight on that? Because that's always where it gets a bit stuck.
My truthful answer to that is I don't know. I think that anything in this manifestation is possible. And so I don't have any problem with being able to accept various psychic experiences as phenomena that take place. What I cannot move beyond within my own understanding is what I just outlined before, that all of these things can happen, but when you start taking them and making them further building work in your maintenance of separation, that's where it becomes tricky. Because you start taking experiences that really are on the edge of human understanding and consciousness. They're just vague feelings that are so easy to wrap all sorts of concepts and theories around. And when you take something so ephemeral, so vague, and start using that to build up your sense of separation, then from my understanding the ego has done what it does so well and has retreated to a more difficult place for it to be seen for its actual non-existence and for it to be dislodged by your understanding. So that would be the only caveat I would bring to it. Anything can happen in this manifestation. So there isn't any restriction on all sorts of weird and wonderful experiences that human beings have had and will continue to have, and human beings will want to wrap meaning around them. And that also, that I don't see as a problem. But when that meaning starts to be used in such a way to further the sense of separation, which is the cause of all human suffering, that's when I find it difficult. Because it flies in the face of what you actually want, which is your own happiness. And if you remove yourself into very rarefied realms in order to try and maybe create the idea of being special or being able to get out of the suffering of this manifestation that you may be experiencing as a way of avoiding that suffering, then I think that's where it becomes reductive and potentially dangerous for that person's understanding of themselves.
Yeah, I've particularly noticed that. I was having a chat with a friend of late, and we were talking about what's trending on social media in the spiritual terms. And she said, oh, have you noticed that there's just this now relishing and like really one-upping over each other about the dark night of the soul in a really unhealthy way, that it's like, oh, the only path to self-realization is actually through these like dark nights and big fires and, you know, storms that you have to walk through. And people seem to be now getting caught in that, the ownership over that, and that now the work is working because, and going into deep descriptive detail about how challenging they're having a moment, and, you know, Kundalini's rising and like there's a lot of like hang up around it, which can be a big off-ramp, can't it?
Who is making these statements? That's what I would ask them. You know, who is this person that is being so observant of all these dark night of the soul? The dark night of the soul, in my experience, is not something that is a phenomenon that you particularly want to advertise. It is a despairing place.
Yeah.
It is a place of finality and pain, when all of your longing looks like it has no hope. And so to trivialize that is a danger, and simply doesn't respect the actuality of a very limited number of people who've gone through what the dark night of the soul actually means within a spiritual journey. Of course, it's a beautiful phrase and it's been used in lots of different scenarios. I've got no problem with that. I love the phrase. But if you've understood that and experienced that within your own spiritual longing, and have faced the despair and hopelessness that that particular dark night of the soul contains, then it's not something that you would want to play around with or make light of, because you may remember it well as a very, very difficult period of your life.
So just to not tie that up, but anything and everything's possible in this realm, from the other realms moving into this realm and so forth, like if we call it, once we've dropped the body. But do we need a human body, though, to experience consciousness? What's happening in that space where the human body is no longer there in order for us to experience consciousness?
The only way that these unresolved energies can come to a completion and be integrated is through a human body. A human body is needed for that separation, that apparent separation, to be there in order for it to be seen. That is how the manifestation came into being. There was a movement in the Absolute, in the Source, and from that, consciousness, this appearance, became manifest. And within that, on a micro scale, a human being also needs that separation, that ability of self-consciousness, in order to be able to witness and understand what's taking place through his or her experience. So in that sense, a human body is needed to go through whatever that particular human body destiny is going to take them through. As far as the relevance of that to other realms, I personally don't have anything to say about that. It's always for me a danger to start taking yourself away from this embodiment now. And our mind does that so easily and so often without any extra input and help from us. And it may be a person's destiny that they want to explore these other realms. But from my perspective, if you really look at what you care about your happiness. That's the fundamental ground for every human being. Watch what human beings do to try and grab their little bit of happiness, to the extent that they'll go to just grab a little bit of happiness. So that's the focus. You are interested in your happiness. And so my question then is, how can you achieve that? How can you point yourself in a direction by the living of your life that becomes more possible? And then a spiritual inquiry starts, a spiritual journey starts, when you start to examine what it is that is causing your suffering. And you start to go into that and inquire into it. And slowly, slowly, if that's your destiny, that will take you back closer and closer to the truth.
And just to detour sideways for a sec, that, let's call it all the enticing things that the mind can get involved in. What I've really begun to notice is that I gather it's been happening for a little while, but I would say I have a very chatty mind. There's a lot going on in there. And it's sort of now like a radio frequency in that sense of if you're sitting in a cafe and you go, oh, I love this song, and it's halfway through the song and you wonder, oh, I just wasn't paying attention to it. It's sort of like that, like it's like a background soundtrack now, and sometimes it tunes in and sometimes it tunes out. But it seems to be just operating on its own. If something useful is there, that comes through. Remarkably a lot more than it used to. Does that ever cease to stop chattering? Is there ever just nothingness? When functioning, not in meditation.
I think I've mentioned this lovely Zen story before. Someone asked a Zen master, what is the nature of the mind? And the master replies, the nature of the mind is to wander, let it wander. So I think that sums it up for me. Your mind is designed that way. That's what the mind does. And it's beautiful. I think I've also used that image of a spinning radar dish that is tuned into all of the different frequencies that are happening in the universe at any one time. And the mind's job is simply to pull those down and offer them to you. And if there's anything in there that you find interesting, and it's normally something that is grabbed by an unresolved emotion, then that mind can start to grind as it thinks over and over again about whatever the subject matter is that the emotion has gotten locked onto. But the first point, you say it's happening more now, and I would recommend that you look and ask yourself, is it actually happening more, or is it that my own capacity of awareness has grown, and that you have become more aware of it than you were before? The first time I did a 10-day Vipassana retreat, I was absolutely astounded by my mind, because I'd just gotten used to it being the way it was all the time. And to stop in silence for 10 days and look at this crazy thing that I'd never seen, I'd never looked at it that way before, was a horror, a shock. So my experience is often the mind appears to increase in activity and volume in direct relation to the awareness growing around that phenomenon of the mind. So that's a possibility in your particular case, that you've just maybe become more aware of it. But I think another description was the sense that it's just doing its thing, that it's just in the background. And for me, that's perfectly as it should be. That is the nature of the mind wandering. And when it's not pulling you against your ultimate wishes hither and thither, based on an emotion getting caught in whatever the mind has brought to you, then it's fine. It just is, as you said, a background noise. And then there is the other phenomenon of the working mind, when the mind then is an incredibly useful tool that you consciously decide to focus on a particular task at hand. And we've spoken of that before too, how when that focus is complete of the working mind, a state similar to those found in meditation can naturally occur, where suddenly time disappears. Suddenly 4 hours have gone by and you have absolutely no idea that it could possibly have been that long. So the working mind is like a premeditative state. It gives you that sense of what happens to the mind, how the mind settles when, in this particular case, it's focused completely and totally on one thing. It's absorbed by a particular activity. And that can be very useful in terms of creation, in terms of creativity, that capacity to completely laser focus yourself on the task at hand. And then as far as the mind disappearing, that happens by itself. And meditation is a space that is conducive to that space happening more frequently than maybe an average daily life would allow for. Because what's happening in meditation is you go into silence, you move towards stillness. And so all of the phenomena on the outside that would attract the attention of the mind suddenly are dropped, fall away. And so there's a possibility, as they fall away, for that mind to settle and go back and reintegrate itself into consciousness, into its source. And that can happen instantaneously in real life. For instance, many people might experience that in making love, in a particular orgasmic love-making with a partner, where all sense of separation disappears and what's left is just now. And there's no mind. There's a witness that can see that's what's left, but there's no mind there any longer. And again, there are many normal occurrences that take place within human daily life that might provoke that instantaneous phenomenon for a small amount of time. But in terms of encouraging it to happen more frequently, then I would always suggest meditation as the best possible way for that to take place.
And what about taking care of the nervous system? You know, in Ayurveda, it's the primary thing. If you want a nice, clean channel for consciousness to flow through, then taking care of the body is a really, imperative thing. Same goes with Daoism and so forth. So lots of lineages that talk about this. But I think now in the West we take care of the body in a different way. It's usually anti-aging, optimizing health, and probably pushing, I think, ourselves a lot harder than we may need to do. But in this, how important do you think it is to care for the nervous system if it's a channel for consciousness?
I think it's important to care for yourself. And yourself, you could write in two different ways. Yourself, all small case, one word, and yourself, capital, uppercase on the self, your two words, self. For me, that's what I think is worth focusing on, because that is, as I said before, fundamentally what you're really interested in. So if you start to move into understanding what is preventing your happiness, then I think the nervous system will do its job, which will simply be to adjust to the space that you're creating inside yourself through your awareness. It may be possible to work on the nervous system and the body. It may be possible with the various new age gadgets that are supposed to help settle the nervous system or help the nervous system or balance the nervous system. All of these things may or may not be possible. From my perspective, I don't find them interesting because I feel that they can again become something that takes you away from the primary focus. All of these things fall into the place that they should fall into when your attention and your focus is on that bullseye. And that bullseye is yourself. And what prevents you from disappearing into that self? Once that focus becomes the main driver of your life, the main occupation of your energy as your life is lived, then all of these ancillary phenomena will fall wherever they should fall according to your destiny. So, as you've pointed out, some people, when trying to fix their bodies, get obsessed with that. And that becomes a diversion. They become obsessed with a particular aspect of themselves that is connected to the physical. And while there's nothing wrong with it, from my perspective, if that takes your ultimate focus away from what will truly settle you, fulfill you, make you happy here now, then it is a diversion. In a similar way, any separate focus on trying to fix the nervous system, I would also feel the same way about. If you want to play with it, by all means do, but just be aware that it doesn't take your eyes off the target.
One of my students had the sweetest realization where she has been very, very, very sick, and she's been down what she calls her healing journey. And she said the other day, she goes, oh my God. She goes, it just dawned on me, and it was clear as day. And she said, for me, it was such a strong realization that she'd gotten so busy in the healing that she'd forgotten the point of her original intention of why she wanted to heal in the first place. It had become such an obsession. And she said the irony is, I'm so stressed and busy doing all the things to heal my body that I've forgotten that right in the beginning my core intention was, let's just deal with this so that we can go back to doing that inner deeper work. And she said, I've dropped all of that and this has become a new obsession. And she was commenting on how the ego is such a tricky little beast. And she goes, because God, it was wearing a pretty cool outfit in this particular instance. It seemed really compelling and suddenly really important. And like she was doing the good work. And she said, I'm exhausted and I'm wrecked. More so than I was just in the beginning dealing with the illness because of all the modalities and the healers and the this and the that. And I've seen that for myself as well when it becomes an off-road.
It's a good example that I would consider the right way to approach whatever events and information lands in your life. If you get sick, of course you would do whatever you needed to do to try and help the body to heal. But for me, more importantly than that, and a deeper process of any healing, is to try and understand what information is landing in you through you getting sick. And the way that you can understand that is to see what the sickness forces you to feel and to do and to become in response to it. That will give you the clearest idea and indicator of the meaning of something that may be trying to get through to your consciousness on a deeper level. So while you do whatever you can to help the body heal itself, I would always say the more important aspect of that healing is to try and look at the information that this particular event has landed inside of you and to make sure that you're not missing anything in that. Because for me, sickness ultimately is something that again is drawing our attention to an area of our life that maybe needs more focus. Something that is coming up that needs more attention. Again, I always come back to that phrase, pain is a call for our attention. So sickness likewise is that. And I am in no way suggesting there should be any judgment around it at all. You get sick, you're sick. You do whatever you can to heal it. But just don't forget to look at all of the other spaces that you've been going through. And in a way, that's what happened to your friend, that she got so busy that suddenly she had that realization that flicked her back to a primary focus. And maybe that was all that needed to happen in her case, that she needed to get taken away and having to deal with healing the body, to be brought back again, maybe with a deeper focus, a deeper understanding that will be harder to move away from or forget.
I've always found it interesting, probably because of my background and illness and with myself and my brother when I was little, but I'm so empathetic and compassionate if somebody else is sick, like such a good carer. But there's a part of me that's also deeply offended if I get sick. Like it feels, not for anybody else, just specifically for me, like some crippling failing. And it's been interesting because I've been juggling some health things in the last couple of years, watching that and going, whoa, it's been such an opportunity to see how my ego structures are working every single time I get sick. Because it's just for me, it's not reserved for anybody else. And I think that when there's non-universality, it's just like, you can see where it really like grips and has a chokehold on me. It's been interesting.
And also, by the sounds of it, led you back to the root causes of it, the primal roots of how this particular caring for other people, no problem, caring for myself, I shouldn't get sick, came up.
Yeah.
So again, it's another example of what I'm saying, that you've looked at that habit and taken it back to its roots. And then that will, by itself, that understanding will help change it. And it will keep appearing for as long as it needs to. And again, I'm not suggesting anything is wrong with getting sick.
Yeah.
It's just whatever happens, getting sick, getting healthy, whatever is going on in your life, bring your awareness to it. Just look at it in the moment and make sure that you're picking up all the signs. Our life is full, moment to moment, of all the signs, all the signposts that we need to direct us in the easiest, quickest way to go towards our own resolution and happiness. It's just we're so busy with all the other stuff that we miss it. And the quieter you become, the more focused you become in your life, the stiller your environment, the easier it is not to miss those signs as they come through. And that makes life so much easier.
Yeah, because you don't have to circle back as much. So one of my little discoveries about my repulsion by my getting sick was my anti-rest monster that I have inside of me, and how I started to become really aware, like happy meditating, no problem, like putting aside the time to that, go on retreat, care for myself. But because sickness wasn't scheduled, I was like, oh, there's still a level of control in when the resting would happen. It's like scheduled rest, scheduled care, and then sickness was not scheduled. And that's where I get so taken aback, like, oh, this wasn't part of my plan, my little me. And that being forced to rest when I didn't want to was so confronting. And the reason I'm raising it is I've been having so many conversations with women who are petrified of resting. There's this total sense of failure, sense of like lacking in productivity. A lot of women, because I've been really drilling into it for 2 weeks as well, have been describing a sense of panic and anxiety, even at they've got their meditation time scheduled, and they can feel this inner voice going, well, you've said 30 minutes, but why don't you do 20? Or you've said an hour, but why don't you do 40? And this constant inner negotiation that's pushing them. Their commitment is strong, their heart's in the right place, and it's like the clearer that gets, the more frenzied the system and their anxiety gets, and their mind's working about them not resting. And a lot of them have said, look, I kind of see the importance of rest, but I also haven't experienced it to the degree that I know that in my bones. So can you share what your understanding of the importance of rest is, that deep somatic psychological rest?
I think rest is just balance. And so in a life lived naturally, it'll simply be something that you suddenly feel and allow yourself to do. And of course I understand how a society would judge that naturalness, and it's something that most Western people have to work through. Indian people don't have a problem with it in the same way. They're quite happy to rest. They're very easy with it. But Western people, with our conditioning, of course, we've been trained in a different way. It's something that each individual looks at within themselves and hopefully becomes more and more compassionate towards themselves, that they don't force themselves to do it. And of course there's a fine line between forcing yourself and just letting everything go. And you'll find a balance between those two poles as you experiment, as you play with it in your life. The main thing is that focus, that you come back to what is it that I really care about? What is it that I really want in this life? What do I want to complete with this opportunity of having a human life and a human body-mind? And that, for me, is the North Star. That's the guiding light, the fundamental target. And once that is always there, then you are magnetically drawn back to that focus after a certain point. And yes, you may go off course left and right, but ultimately that becomes where you're headed according to your destiny.
Mm. What if someone's gotten themselves into a situation where, and I find this to be quite common, where their obligation, their career, and the mortgage they've got themselves bound into, the sort of adulting that's taking place, when someone then, it starts to dawn on them that maybe this isn't the trajectory or the path that they want to be on. And there's a call for, like a deep call to actually find some stillness and find some peace and start to honour practices and meditation and so forth that will help them. And then they realise that they're somewhat stuck, but I guess what I'm trying to ask is, when that consciousness starts to enliven in that way in someone, and I remember it distinctly for myself, and I found it nauseating. Like I couldn't, and suddenly nothing was reconcilable. I was suddenly so clear that this was something that had been pulling at me for ages and I could no longer ignore. And I found myself stuck in a relationship, situation, financially, in a way that meant that the yearning and the honouring that I wanted to do just physically wasn't possible. And it was a very particular type of grief, and I'll say rage, like a frustration of, it's fine. I got more caught in my individuality for a while there about not being able to make the changes and transitions that I knew in my bones were going to help. And I don't know if it's because I went through it and it was such a horrible experience that I really feel for people when they describe this, and that sense of, for me it was despair. Often I hear hopeless, it feels hopeless. And I think it often gets mistaken for, you're just depressed or you're just anxious and it's just a mental condition. Because I don't know if, until you've felt that longing and that yearning and that clarity, it's just too easy to write it off as like, it's just a mental condition, or you're just having a bit of a moment. Or what would you say for, I'm kind of on the other side and I just remember the pain of it, but I can't quite, I remember it needed an enormous amount of diligence. It also needed probably a lot of time to slowly, for the shifts to take place. But if someone's listening to this and they're like, yes, I know that and I'm there, I'm in it at the moment, what would you share?
I think I would ask you to remember how you got out of it. And I would imagine that it had its own destined period of time, that you had to be in it, that you had to feel it, that you had to experience all that it brought you, all of that despair and hopelessness and rage and frustration, before there was enough energy in you to make that move. You didn't make it, it happened. And so again, without in any way minimizing your pain or anyone else's going through those difficult periods of life, I would say just keep going.
Yeah.
It's so impossible to give a particular general recommendation as to what to do in specific life situations. It's impossible. One would need to know so much more about each individual case. But if there is a general focus that I've kept coming back to in this talk, it's just to remember what it is you care about. One of the questions I ask people is, why are you here? Why did you come here? For instance, to a retreat or to a meditation space, or even to this particular incarnation in this manifestation. Why are you here? And ask that person to look inside and see what it is fundamentally that they care about. And often people will have a mixed bag in that looking. And they may care about relationship, they may care about a nice, financially secure life, they may care about wanting to see the world and have as many experiences as possible. And all of that is totally fine, and as it should be. And there may be a certain living out of whatever those experiences are before that focus narrows onto what I call that bullseye, the target of every life. The target of every life, every human life, is the same. Every human being wants their happiness. That is the target. And people try different avenues of experiencing to bring that idea of happiness closer to them. And when they don't work, then the focus becomes more refined, that it becomes more intelligent, that it becomes something that narrows down the field of human experience to one particular focus. And in that narrowing, a huge amount of unnecessary wasted time is avoided by becoming clear, actually, what I really want is that. What I want before I die is that. That focus, that totality, that single-pointedness is often the quality of someone who is on a spiritual journey and whose destiny is bringing them home.
Do you remember the first time I came, you probably don't, but the first time I came to see you and you asked me that in a very pointed way, like, what do you want? And I remember being so astounded at my inability to say the words out loud. And I probably came up with like 15 other reasons why I was here. And then the second time I came to see you and I was like, okay, I don't know why I couldn't say the first time, but truly I'm here because I want self-realization. And it was such an interesting experience of going, oh God, why am I so ashamed to say it out loud? Or, oh, it feels so selfish, and who do I think I am? And then also I think there's a knowing behind that as an individual, there's also, because there is no individual, nothing to be done. That was a whole other set of despair. That was the most frustrating part, where it starts to land and then you're like, wait, but there's literally no individual me to be able to achieve the thing I'm trying to achieve, and who's even trying to achieve it. That was its own, experience.
We've spoken about that before. It's a very painful part of the journey, but all of these are normally essential stages and phases and elements of the journey. There's nothing to be worried about in that way. And actually, there's no rush. Everything is happening as it should. There are no mistakes. So the more that one can let go into that seeing, that understanding, then the likelihood of things becoming easier and easier and faster increases just through that relaxation.
Excellent. If someone was listening to this, and I've gotten a lot of feedback about this, actually, it's igniting something. There was a pull that was already there, like a little seed germinating, and this has sort of thrown a bit of sunshine and water on it. And I think one of the most helpful things you've ever said to me is there's no mistakes, which at once is frustrating when you're like, well, no, I'm pretty sure this is a mistake, but then you realise that there's truly no mistakes. I think I already know what you're going to say. I wanted to ask, what advice would you give that person when they're feeling the growth of that inside of them?
I would start by asking that person about their death. I would ask them, how aware are they of the finiteness of this human experience? And how close do they keep that idea of death to them? Because that is the great accelerator. It's the great leveler, we all die, and it's the great accelerator within a spiritual focus and journey, because it brings urgency to what you most care about. And so then it starts to cut away the unnecessary. There's a quote from Jed McKenna on my wall which said, if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, what would you do today? And why the hell aren't you doing it? That sums it up. When you bring death that close to you, when you bring the awareness of death that close to you, not in a morbid way, not in a way that scares you, but in a way that focuses what it is you want from this human opportunity. That's always what I would say to someone who is looking for that extra help and motivation in keeping focused on what they care about. Remember, you're going to die. Another quote, I love this one, from Krishna in the Mahabharata. Tell your friends, look, it's spring. The buds are sweet. The water sparkles. Everyone is joyful. We are going to die. And that's it. We are going to die. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful, natural crescendo to this amazing opportunity of human life and this opportunity of being identified with a separate body-mind organism with the awareness of something else, with the awareness within each body-mind organism of its own source, of its own originality. And that is the focus that death brings into great relief. That is the fundamental primary focus of every human life. How do I find my happiness? And at a certain point on a spiritual journey, it becomes obvious that your happiness lies in reintegrating with your originality, with your source, with where everything emerges from. So I would ask you, remember that you're going to die, without that becoming something that freezes you in fear or terror or morbidity. Remember it as a friend. Remember that is the closing inverted comma of every life. And before that takes place, allow that impetus to help you remain focused on whatever it is inside of you that you find yourself most drawn to. And every destiny is going to be different in that way, and there is no right and wrong in that. Some destinies will have a particular spiritual focus, and in those destinies, the presence, the awareness, the companionship of knowing that you are not here forever will help you on that journey.
I think that's a beautiful place to end this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you too, Jack. We'll end as we always do, back in silence and stillness for the last 15 minutes.